Welcome back. Let's go now to our top story again. Uncertainty continues with US President Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs pushed back to August 1st. Many countries are scrambling to cut deals with the United States, but Trump is going ahead with other tariffs too, all to get manufacturing back to the US. The latest potential levies are on copper and pharmaceuticals. For more insight into all of this tariff turmoil, let's turn now to Raj Bhala. He's a distinguished professor at the University of Kansas School of Law. Thanks so much for joining us today, Raj. Now, what are some of the specific tariff rates President Trump has proposed for August 1 implementation, and which sectors will be most affected?
It's my pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me. There are three basic tariff programs that are underway. The first dates back to January. Those are the fentanyl and immigration tariffs under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. They're at about 20% on Canada, Mexico, and China, with the exception of hydrocarbons coming from Canada and Mexico. They're on. Second group of tariffs, as you rightly alluded to, are the Section 232 national security tariffs. These are on autos and auto parts already. They're also on steel, aluminum, and steel and aluminum derivatives. And they are at about 25% or 50% as President Trump recently raised them. Very importantly, as your question rightly asked, today we saw more, are the reciprocity tariffs. They are also under the IEEPA, and I would put a footnote, important footnote we lawyers like to add. They are legally suspect. They are being challenged in court in the United States. Let's see if they are upheld. But they have gone forward. You've got a baseline 10% a reciprocity tariff that applies to most of the 160 or so countries that the U.S. has been working with. And then for about 50 or 60 countries, the president has sent out rather aggressively worded letters. 14 came on day 169 of the Trump administration, right. And another 8 came today, day 171. And the range of the tariffs is from a low of 20% that applies to the Philippines, to a high of 50% that applies to Brazil. They are all scheduled to go in effect, the money coming in, supposedly, on the 1st of August.
So which countries have received tariff warning letters? How have they responded, and what are their proposed countermeasures?
So the countries that got the initial 14 letters: Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Kazakhstan, Tunisia, South Africa, Bosnia, Indonesia, Serbia, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and Myanmar, Burma. Quite a range of countries. And I should hasten to add that the major ones in terms of U.S. import dependence would be Japan. About 4.5% of America's imports come from Japan. Korea, 4.1% of American imports total come from Korea. The others are rather count for small amounts, really less than 1% of U.S. total imports. Today, in the last few hours, letters were issued. It was technically not a letter with Brazil, but call it a letter. So Brazil, and then 7 more: Algeria, Libya, Iraq, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Moldova, and the Philippines. And I might add that the exact reciprocity tariff figures did not always equal the initially published on April 2nd, Liberation Day. That was day 73 of the administration. They did not always equal what the president had put in that famous Rose Garden conference. And they were up and down. Some were increased by 1%, 3%. Some were decreased. For example, Sri Lanka, 14%, with no explanation given. And this is one of the several frustrations, is the sort of the transparency. How are these being calculated? Because if you don't know exactly how the tariff is being calculated, it becomes harder to challenge, right, and it becomes harder to defend. It looks like it's arbitrary and capricious, to use the U.S. legal term.
It seems more or less the markets have shrugged much of this tariff turmoil off its shoulders. But can you talk a little bit about how the global markets, especially stocks and commodities like copper and pharmaceuticals, have been reacting to the threat of these reciprocal tariffs?
Well, I think you hit it right on the head, and it's mysterious in a way. I mean, yes, we saw a record spike in trading on copper in New York of 17% up yesterday, but generally, most of the commodity markets have been stable. The pharmaceutical market got a bump today, because the president said he'd be deferring tariffs on pharmaceuticals and APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, for about a year, maybe a year and a half, until they, quote, got their act together, unquote. The equity markets, not a lot of response. And the dollar, is generally weak, but again, not a lot of a response there. I find that mystifying, because I think if you step back and you look at the pattern of what's happening, and you hit on it when you said about reshoring and onshoring jobs, I think one way to characterize what's happening with all these three tariff programs, it's really xenophobic autarky. It's a fear or distrust of foreigners, of interdependence, a system that the U.S. had built in 1945 to 47, anchoring it with the unconditional, immediate, most favored nation clause. It's a fear of dependence on foreigners, and an autarky, and that's the economic term, autarky, of no trade. And I don't understand, and I'm not a market professional, I'm a law professor, but I don't understand why that xenophobic autarky isn't giving the spooks to the markets, as we saw, and the closest historical parallel, that's what it is. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in 1930 and the beggar thy neighbor policies that helped reinforce bad monetary policy and exacerbated the Great Depression. So I wonder how much longer we'll see this sort of markets shrugging off some pretty draconian tariff measures.